They burned his village, took his parents, left him in a world where even the birds forgot how to sing. But somehow, in the middle of that silence, a boy found a way to speak, not with anger, but with stories. This is not just a story of Survivour. It's the story of Zubair and how hope bloomed in the ashes. Zubair was 10 when the sky caught fire. His village tucked gently between the golden waves of the Sahel and the thirsty mouth of the Sahara was a forgotten place where time moved like the slow rustle of dry grass. Goats bleated louder than any machine. The biggest drama was a stubborn yam refusing to boil. Zubair's world was small but full. A clay walled house with a leaky roof. Laughter over cracked bowls of millet porridge. And nighttime tales spun by firelight. His father, Baba Idris, believed in the wisdom of the ground. He talked with gestures, not words. The earth remembers, he'd say, pressing a seed into Zubair's palm. If you listen, you understand everything. His mother, Halima, made magic out of scarcity. She sang while cooking, sang while sweeping, sang even when the neighbors wept. Her voice was a net that caught sadness before it could settle. One market day, his sister braided his hair too tightly, muttering complaints between tugged strands. His mother was outside pounding millets, rhythmically, humming between strikes. The smell of fried akara drifted through the dusty air. Then the noise came. Not thunder, not storm, but something sharper, something angry. The ground bucked. A scream tore through the village, not from a mouth, but from the sky itself. Zubair saw a flash, brighter than the sun, hungrier than fire. The wall split open, walls crumbled. His sister disappeared into a cloud of red dust. His father hauled him beneath a wooden table, just as the ceiling dropped. Then silence. The kind that doesn't come after peace, but after devastation. He crawled out from under the ruins to find his house, broken into memory. There were no screams anymore, just the buzzing of flies and the taste of ash in his throat. He ran, no time to grieve, no one left to bury. He joined others who were running barefoot, wide-eyed, hollow, children, widows, boys with machetes too big for their arms. They walked through thorn-stabbed paths, through nights that offered no dreams, through days where the sun roasted their shadows thin. They walked towards a whisper. Camp 43. The journey to Camp 43 was not measured in miles, but in what was lost. People called it the Ghost Road, because those who walked it had all left something behind. A child, a limb, a name, a world. Zubair walked in silence. His feet cracked open. His voice disappeared. Hunger became a companion. At times, he stumbled upon boiled cassava left on stones. The silent kindness of those who passed before. He once shared a mango with a girl who didn't speak but wept in her sleep. At night, they slept in abandoned huts, under trees that whispered of war, or sometimes in the open, where hyenas howled from afar. He dreamed of his mother's voice, soft, rising like steam from hot food. He woke each time with clenched fists and eyes stinging from tears he hadn't cried. By the 7th day, he saw it. Camp 43. A scar on the landscape, rows of plastic tents stitched into cracked earth. Soldiers at checkpoints, children with eyes too old, people moving like shadows beneath the beating sun. Camp 43 didn't feel like safety. It felt like Survivour wearing a thin mask. Tents sagged under wind and resignation. The air smelled of nylon, sweat, and wounds too fresh for bandages. Aid workers backed names and numbers, but mostly numbers. Everyone became a number. Zubair became one too. No one asked where he came from. He was handed watery beans and pointed toward a nylon sheet, barely tattered, to the ground. That night, the wind ripped through camp like a memory. Somewhere a woman wailed for a missing child. A man stared at his own blood-stained hands. And Zubair called into himself like a question with no answer. But in the center of all this, a spark flickered. Her name was Auntie Rina. Auntie Rina wasn't anyone's aunt. She had no family, no formal tent, just a voice that refused to die. Some said she had been a music teacher before the war, one who trained schoolgirls to sing in harmony. Others whispered she once led a protest song that cost her 3 years in a prison camp. No one knew for sure. What everyone knew was this. Every evening, just before darkness swallowed the camp, she lit a small fire and told stories. Not from books. There were none. From memory, from pain, from rebellion. Children gathered like moths. Even adults stood in the shadows, pretending not to listen. Her words wrapped around the weary like a shawl. Zubair watched from the edges, unsure. On the 4th night, her gaze found him. "You," she said, pointing. "Boy with the quiet eyes." He froze. "Do you know the story of the moon that forgot how to shine?" He shook his head. "Then you must tell it." "I don't know stories." "Exactly," she smiled. "So make one." The others giggled softly, but Auntie Rina silenced them with a glance. Zubair's voice shook as he stood. He looked at the fire, not the faces. "There was once a moon," he began, "who saw so much suffering. It grew dim. Every night, it watched people cry. So it hid behind clouds, behind silence, until one boy climbed the tallest tree and whispered, 'We still need you.' And the moon remembered." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Auntie Rina clapped once. "You are a teller now." But even stories couldn't protect from what came at night. Camp 43 had secrets. There were men who smiled with their teeth but not their eyes. Disguised recruiters, traffickers, disappearances began, mostly girls. One night, Zubair saw Karim, a boy his age, dragged from a tent. No one moved. No one screamed. Zubair turned to Auntie Rina. "Why don't they stop them?" "Because," she said slowly, we are still learning how to be human again. But Zubair didn't wait. He started observing, memorizing faces, marking paths with stones, sketching escape maps into dust. He was becoming something new, not just a survivor, but a sentinel. Auntie Rina trusted him with more. She introduced him to a secret web within the camp. The whisperers, women, teachers, former activists, they passed notes in food sacks, hid girls in barrels, shared flash drives full of bad news and voices from the outside. Zubair became their youngest runner. He carried passwords under his tongue, slipped messages into broken sandals, hid maps behind rice bags. Each time he succeeded, he felt like he had taken back a piece of his voice. One night, during a raid, he hid 3 girls inside an overturned water drum. One of them, Amara, gripped his hand before crawling in. "Don't stop," she whispered. "You are our voice." The fire came on Wednesday night. Zubair woke to smoke and screams. Auntie Rina's tent was in flames. Her books gone. Her scarves ash. Her voice missing. Some said she escaped. Some said she was taken. Zubair didn't speak. He sat near the ashes until sunrise. That evening, when the children gathered, he stood where she once did. "Tonight," he said, "I'll tell you about the moon that remembered its light." And he told it again. But this time, it wasn't just a story. It was a vow. Years passed. Camp 43 changed. Plastic bottles became classrooms. Tires became gardens. A radio station burst to life. Voices from the dust. Zubair taught children to tell stories. One girl, Kemi, wrote poems on rice sacks. A boy carved birds from wire. A girl painted women with wings. Hope, once a whisper, was now a language. Zubair's voice deepened, but his stories always began the same. Once, there was a boy who didn't know the moon could break. One afternoon, a nurse arrived, Amara. Older, stronger, her eyes still full of storms, but her hands steady. "You saved me," she said. "No," Zubair replied. "You saved yourself. I just reminded you how." She began a trauma program for new arrivals. Another woman started a first aid unit. A young boy launched a library in a tent. The ripples grew. It began with one name, Karim. Zubair etched it onto the inside flap of a supply tent with a piece of charcoal. Then another name, Auntie Rina. And then another, Mama Deji, the older woman who once handed him her only spoon of beans the night he arrived at Camp 43. Soon, the flap became a wall, and the wall became a canvas, and the canvas grew. He called it the memory wall. At first, it was just names. Those taken, those lost, those never spoken aloud. Then came stories, small ones. A child drawing a mother's laugh. A recipe written in trembling handwriting. A boy's poem titled, "I Remember My Father's Feet." Volunteers began to visit the wall with pens. The children added colors. Some people cried when they saw their own memories reflected by strangers. When the aid coordinator ordered it painted over for being too emotional, Zubair stood in front of it alone. He didn't yell. He just began to read the names aloud. one by one. Others joined him, whispering, then chanting, until even the guard lowered their eyes. The walls remained. They renamed it the Living Archive, and so the stories and the people they belonged to could never be erased again. Zubair didn't think anyone outside the camp would care. But one day, a woman from a foreign radio station visited the camp. She wanted to interview trauma survivors. Zubair refused. Instead, he handed her a bundle of folded papers. Each page was a letter, written by children, widows, boys missing arms, girls with burnt faces. Letters to no one and to everyone. Letters titled, "To the sky that watched and did nothing. To my sister who may still be alive. To the boy who shared bread when I had none." The reporter left quietly. Weeks later, the camp received word. One of the letters had been read on air in another country. Then 2 more. Then a dozen. Donations trickled in. Books, recording equipment, a solar-powered projector. But something more powerful happened. People started writing back. Letters arrived from school children in Germany, widows in Kenya, students in Brazil, messages of solidarity, pages full of hope, poems, prayer, drawings, and sometimes just the words, "We hear you." Zubair gathered the replies and hung them on a rope that stretched between 2 trees. When the wind blew, it looked like the camp itself was speaking back to the world. And suddenly, it was. It was late evening, the day before what would have been his mother's birthday. Zubair sat under the bamboo tree, journal in hand. He was writing a new story, one he wasn't sure how to end. His fingers hovered, trembling silently. He whispered, "Once there was a boy who never stopped telling stories, even when his voice cracked." Just then, a soft light crept across the camp. He looked up. The moon, full and golden, was rising behind charred outline of a broken watchtower. It looked enormous, alive. Children noticed first, then adults. People stepped out of tents and shelters, looking skyward. Quiet. No one spoke. Then a girl, maybe 5, whispered. It came back. Zubair smiled, his throat tightening. "It never left," he replied. "We just forgot how to look." That night, they held the first night of 1,000 stories. An open circle where anyone could speak. No microphones, no stage, just voices. A mother told a story about the goat she raised as a child. A boy sang a song his sister once taught him. An old man recited a prayer in 3 languages. A girl named Hawa drew the moon in sand using a stick. They stayed up all night, laughing, crying, remembering. In the morning, Zubair added the new lines to his journal. "Even in ashes, seeds remember how to bloom. And even in silence, the moon waits to be seen again." Zubair turned 18 with no cake, no candles, no one saying, "You made it." Just the sound of rain on nylon, a roasted cup of hot tea, and the quiet pressure of becoming what others needed before knowing who you truly are. He wasn't a boy anymore. Not really. Not when he had already seen men burned alive. Not when he had buried hope and dug it back up with trembling hands. By now, Camp 43 had changed. Not in size, but in soul. There was a community garden, where a weapon dog once stood. Classroom made from plastic bricks. A bulletin board where stories and poems were posted next to food schedules. And at the center always was Zubair. He never asked to lead, but people started waiting for him to speak. Children waited for him to tell stories. Adults waited for him to translate their grief into something the world could understand. And the world was starting to listen. One day, a drone flew over Camp 43. Zubair stood with the children, watching it like a strange metal bird. He didn't know its name, but days later, an aid worker brought a tablet. Someone had filmed the camp, the school, the murals, the radio shared with its tangled wires, and posted it online. It went viral. Suddenly, journalists were calling. Celebrities were tweeting. NGOs were offering supplies they'd ignored for years. A university from Europe offered scholarships. People came with cameras, with clipboards, with questions like, is it true that storytelling changed your entire camp? How do you stay hopeful when the world has done nothing for you? Can you smile for the photo? Zubair grew tired of smiling. He gave interviews, but only if he could share others' voices too. He started a project, Echoes from 43, a video series where people told their own stories, raw and unfiltered. He didn't want to be anyone's poster child. He wanted the world to see the ones still in the shadows. One afternoon, as the sun baked the camp to silence, a name called out across the checkpoint. Zubair! He turned, slowly, expecting another eager volunteer. But the face that stepped through the gate stopped his breath. It was his sister, Lamia, older now, taller. Her eyes, mirrors of his, filled with disbelief. They had both assumed the other was dead. Their reunion was not dramatic. No screaming, no falling to the ground. Just a quiet hug that lasted too long and still not enough. Lamia had survived. Taken in by a missionary convoy, raised in a different camp, learned English, worked in logistics. She had come as part of a visiting aid team, never imagining her brother was alive. They sat for hours beneath the bamboo tree, piecing their childhood together like broken pottery. There were holes in their memories they couldn't fill. Their mother's laugh, their father's last word, but the silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of shared survivor. That night, Zubair added her name to the living archive, this time in blue chalk. Because some stories don't end in ash, some come back. Zubair stood in front of the children, the same way Auntie Rina once did. Only now, the fire between them was his to tend. The camp was quieter these days, not because the pain was gone, but because they had found language for it. On the walls were poems, on rice sacks were prayers, and on each face, the faint glow of becoming. That night, he told the story without shaking. Once the moon stopped hiding behind clouds, not because the world got brighter, but because a boy kept telling stories beneath it. Until it remembered it dusty. As he finished, the children clapped, but one girl, Amara, stood and said, "You are not just telling stories, Zubair. You're making us believe we can write our own." Zubair looked at the sky, not cloud, just stars. Even in the darkest places, something or someone remembers how to shine.